So you might find yourself asking, well, how is it that individuals convicted of crimes are sometimes subsequently exonerated? Well, the system is not perfect, and the way evidence and justice is distributed is not always fair. A University of Michigan report found that of 125 exonerations in 2014, the defendants in 47 cases had originally pleaded guilty despite being innocent. So they were probably told, even if you didn't do it, a jury might not see it that way, and you're going to go to jail for a longer time. If you just plead guilty now, then you'll limit the damage. And in 58 instances, no crime had actually been committed. So the way criminal justice is distributed is not always the way. It's not always in reference to the ideal. There's the ought. This is the way criminal justice ought to be structured and distributed, and then there is the way it is. Of course, how can the criminal justice system respond to these indiscretions? Well, you can create conviction integrity units. These are specialized long-term projects that work to overturn wrongful convictions. Something else you might consider is another perspective when we're talking about these improprieties of the system. Restorative justice comes to mind. Offenders in this case should be reintegrated back into society, and that should be the intent from the beginning of the process to the end. We should limit coercive punishments. They ultimately end up being self-defeating. Some of the people end up being exonerated and let out, and of course there's a loss of trust with the population that you're trying to serve. And then ultimately we're thinking that the justice system needs to be more humane. We always have to remember that no single perspective is inherently just. During the past decade, crime control and equal justice models have dominated, but that doesn't mean they're always working the way that we hope they were. Rehabilitation, due process, and the least intrusive treatments have not been completely abandoned, but they have diminished. So all of these perspectives are working in close proximity to each other. To say that they're working in harmony or in concert is probably a large stretch of the imagination, but the overarching criminal justice system wants to try and coordinate those events to make it much more efficient. We also have to think about ethics. The justice system personnel function in an environment where moral ambiguity is the norm. It's easy to take advantage of the enormous amount of power that is granted to criminal justice employees, especially because we give them an awful lot of discretion in their decision making. It is not hard to think of how a police officer could easily become corrupted by the system they're inherently trying to serve, or a judge, or anyone that is part of the criminal justice system that has decision-making power can be corrupted. Police have the authority to, of course, deprive people of their liberty. So when we're thinking of ethics and law enforcement, we have to remember that there are people all throughout this process. An individual human being that is a police officer, an individual human being that is a transgressor. The police have a unique ethical perspective. The vast majority of the individuals that enter the criminal justice system do so through a police-citizen contact. If a police officer decides to take action, the case is born. If not, then a case is seldom initiated. So, officers exercise a lot of discretion in whether they decide to follow through with a case or to not follow through with the case. There's a duality of the police role that creates many ethical dilemmas. Questions like, should they target groups they believe responsible for certain crimes, or is this racial profiling? Should officers tell the truth even if a guilty person goes free? Another moral dilemma. Should officers patronize the same restaurants even if they are barred from discounted meals? Another ethical dilemma. These are the things that police officers have to take in consideration as they do their job. We also have to worry about ethics in the courts. Prosecutors, of course, have roles that sometimes conflict. You might find yourself representing the people who are trying to see justice for those involved, or representing the court to ensure all constitutional standards are met. Or asking yourself, if a plea deal is made, are victims receiving true justice? And the defense attorneys, of course, have dual roles as well. You have to ask yourself, what if the defendant admits they have committed a crime that they're actually on trial for? So now you're a defense attorney who knows the person that you're defending is guilty. What's your ethical responsibility here? Ethics are also found in how corrections are distributed, especially in the way we distribute punishment. We have to ask ourselves, is it fair and ethical to execute a criminal? Those that don't believe in the death penalty constantly struggle with that. Is parole determined fairly or biased against those who are not well spoken? Another ethical dilemma. Does the amount of money impact the type of justice you get? Corrections workers also have to use discretion. Think about whether a prisoner that's reported for disorderly conduct ultimately gets put in a position where they're jeopardizing their parole. So this corrections officer is like, this person has been moving forward in the system, and yes, they did something wrong here, but if I say anything, then they lose their parole. And which is worse? Keeping them in prison longer or turning a blind eye?